Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending today's WEHBA discussion session. It is my pleasure to be the MC for today's session. Before we get started, I would just like to send out a huge congratulations to Carla Agostino for the WIN Award, the Industry Award. Congratulations from all of us here, very well deserved. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsor today, Cogeco. Without sponsors such as yourself, we wouldn't be able to put on these events. So thank you so much. Today's discussion is featuring Winnie Linker. But before we get started, I just wanted to let you know a little bit about Winnie. Thank you for coming today. She has very, very good insights, perspective, and experience on knowing your value, yourself, and your organization. Winnie Linker has 20 years of experience working with organizations, leaders, and teams to strengthen performance and productivity and to develop sustainable change, always focused on people. In our practice, she integrates strategic planning with all areas of human resources development and system efficiencies to facilitate deep levels of employee engagement and results. Winnie is passionate about encouraging and coaching people, especially women, to recognize their value, develop their strengths, and move forward to realizing and living the life and careers of their dreams. Winnie, over to you.
Unmute. So thanks for that. Happy to be here with you this morning to talk about a topic near and dear to my heart. And just to elaborate on that, lots of kind of big words in a bio, but I have worked for a number of years in human resources. You know, I originally had planned to be a psychologist and started working for somebody who started the family court clinics. And that was my dream. And I had feedback from him and he suggested going into business. So I did my MBA and so try to combine in my work psychology and business. So that kind of leads into the topic of knowing yourself and knowing your value. So as I understand it, this group has got together, had a few questions about that. So we chatted a little bit about, Angela and I, about how to start this and what would be a topic of interest. And that is it, knowing your value. So how do you get at that? It's such a broad topic, right? So we thought, well, let me start with, first of all, how do you know your value? And it's not just related to your organization. You want to take a look at your value, and we'll focus on organizations because it's about work, but knowing your value really starts with introspection. So taking a look at what are the values that you have yourself. And as you know, as you move through different kinds of careers and work, that becomes more and more important. And we'll talk a little bit about how you might get to that. So knowing your values is really important. What aligns with you? What are your interests? And that will help you define what sort of work you want to do and where you want to achieve your, where you want to put your efforts, which is always an exchange. The other thing is knowing what your strengths are. So what strengths do you have that you bring and what are your interests? So all of those align, and sometimes it's not perfectly aligned, but it's great to have a good idea of what those are and knowing what the marketplace is generally around you. So you can't outplace yourself. You need to know what market is and where you want to go. So based on that. So taking a look at yourself first, and we talked about that lots of women are hesitant maybe to ask for raises, to maybe go for really the job that they're really looking for. And so taking a look at our own value is so important. So there's so many different ways to do that. So I have a couple of suggestions here. There are a lot of personality assessments out there. So Myers-Briggs is one. So a lot of you might have experienced that. There's another one called Colors, and they're all based on a number of questions that you might ask yourself to say, hey, what it asks you to be introspective. It's basically you telling yourself what your personality is. Those are great things to maybe take a look at if you haven't already. The other thing that is really some great ways to find out what your values are and what your worth is, especially in an organization, is to ask for feedback. So you're at a meeting take a look. It's sometimes we're running 100 miles an hour. Take a look after the meeting. What did I like about the meeting? What did I do in the meeting that I liked? What would I like to change? Get some feedback from your colleagues when you're on a project. It doesn't matter what level you are in an organization. Get some feedback on how you are doing. Always recognize where you might align what you're doing in the organization with your value and your interests. And I guess when you're if you're looking for a change in an organization, that's super important to take a look at what kind of feedback you can get about where you're fitting. Sometimes we're running so quickly that it's hard to get feedback. So that's really, you're in charge of your own career in an organization. So you want to make sure that whoever you report to, you can ask for feedback, and there's other ways to obtain that feedback as well. You can go externally. People work with clients all the time, and sometimes it's kind of scary. You don't want to ask for maybe feedback and get the wrong thing, but it is sometimes an eye-opener, and people are happy to do that as well. So asking for a raise can be a scary thing, but I'd say another piece of that is, so you know yourself, you know your values, you're working on that. Another thing to really be clear about is the organization. Where does the organization stand? What are the competencies that they're looking for? How do you align yourself with those competencies? So competencies are more, the general skills that might be transferable in an organization and how you fit with that. So understanding that is really important, but also where is the organization in terms of its budget? Where is it going? Is it expanding? Is it declining? Make sure you understand the politics. Sometimes people don't want to be in the politics. Oh, I'm not political. Well, we all are, and we all need to understand how the decisions are made in an organization that would affect you. How are decisions made? What is the organizational structure? Doesn't matter what level you're at in an organization, I would say that is a super important piece to understand. And if you're taking a look at an organization and where you fit in that organization, it's really important to understand what is the situation. So right now, elephant in the room, we're in COVID, we're in a pandemic. So things are really different in organizations, and it's important to understand where that organization might be. Some organizations have really thrived in that they've been able to pivot. They've maybe hired different kinds of people to operate their business, and some organizations have done really poorly and are struggling in this. So it's important, regardless of, we're in a pandemic now, but regardless of when they're doing well and when they're doing not as well, to understand where your organization is headed. You don't want to be asking for a raise in a situation where there's a downturn. It just shows that there's not a good understanding. And when you are looking to move or ask for a raise, that shouldn't come as a surprise. You should be able to have a discussion with your direct report and never have a surprise. So it should be great to have some goals and that you can show that you've achieved that and you can measure yourself against that, but also so within, but as well externally in the marketplace, knowing where you fit. So we've covered a little bit about knowing yourself, understanding your organization, and then aligning those two to look for where your next move is. I might say that, there are some, I get asked a lot, what do I look for? Where do I feel that the fit is? How do I know if I'm a fit or not? So that's not a black and white question to answer. It's not a dichotomy. It's taking a look at the communications in the organization. How are the communications? How do they, how does the organization communicate with staff? How do you have an opportunity to communicate your interests, your desires, your interests, your work, and how are you able to contribute? So understanding how that works is maybe, so even before you apply for a position, you want to know something about the organization and your connection with it. So in recruitment, I'd say about 30% of people who apply to jobs, it's not a good fit at all. So you might be in a totally different industry, but that's what's going to happen. People blanket, and send in resumes. So before you're even applying for the job, you want to make sure that there's a fit. So those are some of the things you want to look for. Communications, how does the company communicate? And even once you get into the company, you might look at, hey, how do they communicate? Is that really a fit with me? It might take you a few months to figure out how that is working and how that sits with you. The other thing is a demonstration of how staff are included in decisions, how management maybe communicates and operates, and how are people treated? Do you feel comfortable with that? Do you feel proud to be in a company? And have you felt that that is a good fit with you? Another piece is, as we mentioned earlier, decision making. How are decisions made? Are you aware of those? Does the company communicate broadly the decisions? Do you find out kind of at the last minute? So again, we talked about the link, understanding yourself, understanding your company, and understanding how those two fit together is the first step. It seems like, those are all the thinking pieces behind getting to the front where you're asking for a raise or you're looking for a change. And those are really important pieces to take some time to understand. So we talked about understanding yourself, looking at Myers-Briggs, and redesigning yourself. And so those are ways to do that, and also looking at feedback from other folks in the organization. And here are some questions that generally we share with staff. If you're looking at yourself and you're trying to look at your impacts and how you can do better and asking for feedback, here are some maybe 3 or 4 questions you might think about. What or who drains my energy, or who gives me energy? So after a meeting, after a day, after a week, and it doesn't even have to be at work. Let's say it's, it could be in personal relations. It's a really important question to ask. And a lot of these questions are similar to what you might find on a personality test as well. Another one is, what makes me laugh? What gives me joy? We've been in situations where it's drained us at work, and other times where you've laughed and you want more of those. So what particular situations cause that for you? What am I most proud of? So think about what you've done that you're most proud of in a meeting, in a week, on a project, on a challenging situation. What do I like to do on vacation? So there's a little bit of a twist. What do I like to do on vacation? Do I like to go to the museums? Do I like to have downtime? Do I run to find, the biggest party? So that will be an indicator, extrovert, introvert, and that usually recharges people's batteries. So that's a good thing to kind of reflect and think about. And what things that I do at work that make me wake up early and want to rush into work? So what are the things that you're looking forward to, and what are the things that drain your energy? So those are some questions to ask about, kind of fit with your work. And you want to make sure that you have that fit before you ask for, you're looking for that next step, or you're asking for that raise. So I'll take a break there, and before we move on to our next section, just to see if there's any questions.
Well, Winnie, I have a question. What would you give? What kind of advice would you give to someone who perhaps, maybe is new in the role, new on the job, and it was missed for whatever reason? They find themselves not really aligned to the values of the company, for whatever reasons. Do you think they should just adapt to those values, change, or what kind of conversations should they have with their boss at that point if they're not happy early on within the company?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Sometimes that comes because people haven't been there long enough. We have a little bit of a feedback. Do you hear a bit of a feedback? Okay. Yeah. So people might, if generally, you have your 3-month probation period, and that's the 3 months to get to know the organization and get to know your fit in the organization, and the organization to get a look at you. Sometimes that happens when there hasn't been a good onboarding process. So I would say that the key point there is to stay close to who you report to, because you may not have had the onboarding and the orientation that would be helpful for you. So if people are left to flounder to find their own way through an organization, that could be indicative of the organizational culture. But having a chat with who you report to is important. The other thing is, when people are onboarded, what we generally ask is that you have maybe a mentor, and if your manager doesn't have time for you, ask for a mentor that you could maybe ask questions to. You might want to connect with your human resources department, who may have, as we have in the YWCA, an HR advisor assigned to different groups who could maybe help through that. If it's a specific question about maybe a client, that's could be maybe resolved through a discussion, but generally it is getting out there, meeting with the different folks. Maybe you have a client group that you're not comfortable with, so it may be set up with the right connections. So generally as well, you want to make sure that people, when they first start, are oriented to who their clients are, who their colleagues are, and have a mentor. But that's another piece, checking in with colleagues as well. And early on in the organization, as I mentioned earlier, one of the important pieces is to understand the politics. So by that, I mean the structure, the decision-making. So maybe a little bit more research into the organization to understand, say, how is this set up? How are these decisions made? How am I impacting that? And checking understanding with the manager. It's never too late really to, so let's say you feel you started on the wrong foot. It's never too late really to check in after with who you report to let them know that you're feeling uncomfortable in which areas and what you could do, because they will probably be thinking the same thing, that it's not a fit. And if you're heading towards a termination, yourself leaving or the organization terminating, generally it can be resolved by, people know that. You have a feeling that it's not a good fit. So getting out there and getting out of your comfort zone to talk about that is really important when you feel that, and there's an opportunity to rectify that. I've seen that many times, and then also the other side of the coin, have no idea because it just doesn't work out. But generally, if it isn't a fit, it's because of a misunderstanding. I mean, it might be the wrong organization for sure, or the wrong person, but it is a communication issue for sure.
And one other thing I've always wondered about, so you mentioned, people in different industries applying, blanketing to, different types of jobs and roles. How do you go through all those resumes? Like, what stands out? Is it the skills? Is it the characteristics, or the experience? Right. A bit of both?
Yeah, what's the process? So, it depends on the position. It depends on the timing. So right now, we'll talk about that. In the pandemic, it's a little bit different, and what we see is different. But so for some positions, we might get 400 applicants. You're right. And some other positions in other companies that I've worked, we have, no exaggeration, 1,000. So to go through, in some organizations, there are filters that are, more electronic, and so they filter through the connection with the actual words. So if the words match to the requirements of the position. So if you're right now, if you're looking at a manual sorting through, it's the same idea. Is there a connection with matching the words on the application to the actual requirements? So that is really important. That's what we look for. Is there a match? So when we sort through, I'd say you have about 10 seconds of attention to one resume. So that's really a short period of time, and maybe that's generous, I don't know. So we have to have, so when we're sorting through, have a very good idea and align with the manager, the hiring manager, of what the key requirements are for the position, so the qualifications. So those are some of the basics, the qualifications, and then the key requirements. So there's generally probably 5 to 10 that we're looking for that are, you know, that rise to the top of the list. So those would be things that you want to pull out. And, you know, again, it goes back to knowing yourself. A lot of people in this time are morphing. They're looking for and taking the opportunity to change careers, change jobs, move to a different location. And that's a real trend right now where people are looking for, we have greater opportunity in Hamilton, for example, for more highly professional specialized positions who are moving in or being able to work remote from perhaps Toronto. And so we see that there's a difference in the marketplace, and it may be harder to recruit for frontline positions for various reasons. But going back to the resume itself, if you are morphing, you're thinking of changing positions, then you might, for example, you might have been in finance and you want to get in human resources. So you might pull out all of the work that you've done in finance, that you've worked in human resources. You might have worked on developing a human resources management system. You might have worked on an orientation program jointly with the human resources department. So instead of just having a, you know, a very standard resume that just talks about, you know, your finance role, you need to pull out and know yourself, pull out those pieces that are applicable to the new job. So going back to those 5 or 10 things that we're looking for, we're looking for ABC. Do you have ABC or close enough thereof? So if your language doesn't match, it's hard to match that to the job requirements. So you want to try to match that as closely as possible, understand what's behind those requirements. If we're asking for somebody to work in human resources and you've worked in finance, taking that example, and you list all of your accounting experience, that's hard to match. Even though your accounting experience might have been working on a human resources management system, you haven't pulled that to the forefront. So that's number 1 in screening. That's the first screen. So we have to go through the 400 and we're looking for one position. So we screen as best as we can. And, you know, we try to give some leeway. The more the person doing the screening is aware of the position and works with the hiring manager, the better the match is going to be. And then the next step will be once the screen, so we've screened it down to maybe 7, we've taken out 30% who apply for every job. And we're down to maybe, or the 25%, let's say we're down to 300. And then we've screened it down to 75. It's still a huge number. And then we'd have to screen it down based on interest, understanding of the organization. So sometimes that boils down to a cover letter. So if some people might have produced a cover letter, that's helpful, especially for if you're morphing positions or pivoting or changing careers. I can tell you that a cover letter can be super helpful because it helps explain why you're moving into a different position, might explain why you're moving across the country or changing countries or your availability. So help connect the dots is what I would suggest. As much as possible, connect the dots. If you're moving industries from profit to nonprofit, for example, let us know why. Tell us your interest. Tell us why that might be and why we need to look at your application for that. So once that's screened down, we'll do a phone interview generally, and those are common now. And just to connect, to hear a voice, to see the interest, to see the understanding of the company itself. And just really at that point, it's more the basics. Am I reading your resume correct? Do you have these years of experience? Are you still available? Does the salary range fit? And then we move into the first interview, and there may be a second interview as well.
Thank you. And another very prevalent question right now, and you already did touch upon this quite a bit. It is year end, it's bonus time for many people. It's time to ask for a raise. And we talked about timing, and because of exactly what you mentioned, the market landscape right now with the COVID restrictions, and a lot of companies are doing well, and there's just as many not doing quite so well. And as a woman, it's always difficult, or I shouldn't say always, but in some cases, they feel it's harder to ask, their boss or for whatever raise, going back to knowing your value, of course. What would be your recommendation and advice? I mean, for me, I personally think, it's not that great of a time to ask for a raise, of course, right now, but is there really ever a good time, or what do you think on that? What are your insights on when is the good time to ask or how to approach it? I mean, I know the feedback is, took note of that. You come prepared with your feedback, of course, and examples of, what you've done well, and maybe and recognize what you could have done better. That goes without saying. But in light of, again, today's economy and this COVID, is it a good time to ask right now?
Yeah, so again, I think it really is knowing your value and the organization. So we talked earlier about getting feedback from your manager, and organizations are still moving forward with raises, and keeping moving forward with those job bands that they have, and because we need to remain competitive as well. So that's the other side of the coin. And for companies, it's important to know what your cycle is. So companies generally do it on a budgeting cycle. So that's an important piece. But, it's never too early to start talking with your manager about your interests for moving forward, and even asking who you report to. What some organizations have a band where you're within a band, and then so there's movement within the band. So that's the question to ask. What's it going to take for me to move up to the band? What's it going to take for me to achieve this salary? And you can move towards that target. So even now is not the wrong time to be thinking about that, because you're thinking about your career. You're thinking about, in some ways, people are working in some companies even harder now than they ever have. So it is important to understand where the company is headed, where their budgeting cycle is, where there might be opportunity. So that's on one side, there's the organization, and then on the other side is you as an individual thinking about your own career. And it's really important to be able to have an annual, that's the benefit of a performance management program or a process, where in an organization you have an opportunity to talk about your annual goals, set those goals. And in our organization, we have that set up. The main purpose is to have that two-way discussion. So I have a goal, this is where I want to go, but also where do I want to develop myself? So if a raise isn't possible at that time, where do I want to develop myself? What opportunities might I have for different positions, or different opportunities speaking or leading a project team, or working in a kind of a different area, or just a different kinds of aspect of my position that might make me grow in that position. So no, it's not the wrong time to talk about that, but it needs to be discussed in context where we are right now with COVID, and understanding where the organization is headed. If you're not sure where it's headed, have that discussion so you can understand that. Because right now people are looking at moves. They're looking at, their organizations. And, this is through this kinds of emergency and a very unique situation. This is where you have a good understanding of how your organization is going to operate. What are they doing in terms of COVID? How are they responding? Have they included people in the communications? Have they kept people on staff? So those times, this time particularly, is really an important time for folks to look at how their organization has responded to staff, and how they are. Do you have a comfort level with that? Is that showing that there's a connection with your values and the organization's values?
Are there any questions from any of the attendees at this point? I don't see any in the chat, so.
So we wanted to talk a little bit about mental health in the workplace as well, right? So yeah, so right now we see that not just in workplaces, but in the community in general and in Ontario. And if you have friends who are doctors, they have all turned into mental health is the #1 issue that they're dealing with. People with depression, having worry issues, dealing with their families who are in long-term care, worrying about their children, about their spouses, about their jobs. It's just everybody on the call has something connected with that. And even if you don't have that particular connection, you have the change in the workplace. Some of us are connected online for how many hours a day. And so as social beings, just missing that, that interaction. Sure, we go to the grocery store, but it's not the same, right? So really a focus, organizations having a focus on mental health is really important. So to the extent possible, people who are in organizations, if you're looking or having difficulties with your work, it's not just your manager there. Take a look at your EAP program. A lot of them have beefed up and they've expanded their offerings. So I know staff, and we are amazed at ours and what they have offered. A lot of free counseling and access to resources that are amazing. There's a great program out there called Not Myself Today. It's offered through Mental Health Canada. And it is a fantastic program. We have that at the YWCA. We have been sharing a lot of the resources that are with that program. So that is something that offers, again, counseling resources. It offers video resources, and it's not just, it is mental health focused, but this is something that would be transferable and to any kinds of work or issues. It also has activities to bring people together through the organization, things that can be used in general meetings. And the other thing that I would suggest is that companies hopefully are moving forward with their recognition programs. So a lot is falling on the leader shoulders at this time, just to keep staff engaged, motivated. And we're finding, a higher than usual incidence of absences in the workplaces, which shows, the mental health and the stress in the organizations. So again, staying close to your manager, using your EAP. We have launched the recognition program in the YWCA. We had planned to do that originally, but we launched it all online just to give managers extra tools to recognize staff. So we gave them digital cards, digital buttons, as well as in-person buttons. We have a lot of people working on the front lines. So buttons and stickers and cards to thank folks. Just giving those extra tools, which is helpful, just in the workplace at this particular time, just to try to deal with the stress. I'm actually wearing one of our buttons now, Community Connector. So this was given to me. So that's kind of what they might look like. So this is an example of the stickies that might be given to staff with a little note. I just wanted to show you, I did mention one of the self-assessment tools that you might consider. This is called Strengths Finders. It's from Gallup. We're using that in our organization. And it's a self-assessment. And what it is Gallup, you might recognize it, they do millions of surveys every year. So out of the millions of surveys, they have summarized the 35 top strengths in organizations. And so you can take a short quiz and it identifies your top skills. And from there, it helps you kind of connect with your work. And it's a great self-assessment tool as well to use.
I'm just going to chime in, and I think that is so important, the mental health aspect, because as I know when we spoke before, we did talk about how stressful it is, and for everyone, and specifically women who are having to maybe work from home now because of COVID, and they've got childcare to worry about. So there's a period of, they can't go to daycare and so forth, and kind of juggling both. So the fact that organizations are implementing and are continuing to focus on mental health is great. It's really needed, yes.
Yeah, and we see that, the situation with the pandemic, COVID has impacted women the most. They take a huge impact because of that. They are often employed in precarious work or part-time, less represented in the workforce. And so a lot of those jobs have disappeared or they're closed down. The impact also on worrying about the childcare and the childcare schools, but also the childcare situation and the care of the family. So it is a huge impact. And if we're talking about people in the workplace, that's, people understanding their worth, but also recognizing that they can take advantage of mental health resources that are in their workplace that could be helpful. And managers, I know in our workplace, have taken an extra, that's why we're providing extra resources to recognize staff, but to the extent, that people can take advantage of what there is available. And it's not just it's just not an easy fix, but it is knowing that what we're dealing with, we're a women's organization. So trying to keep, the jobs going and trying to recognize people at work and providing programs to support them in their work. So also, I think, for folks who are women who are looking for changing jobs and asking for raises, again, I don't think, excuse me, I don't think, just a second here. Okay, I don't think just because we have the pandemic, now is a time to not talk about that. It's probably one of the best times to talk about it, just to have an opportunity, because either it is possible or it's not. But having that conversation just because it's not possible doesn't mean that we have to take that conversation off the table. And it doesn't, and this is a great opportunity for people to reflect, I think, overall on their career and their direction, their trajectory, which organization that they're with now, is that a good fit for them? Are they taking a look how the organization is responding in this emergency situation? And people are going back to school, they're taking a look, they're changing jobs, and it's not something that everybody's doing, but it is a great opportunity at this time to do that. So all of this is a very timely conversation because we're all working and doing something, and now it gives us pause and opportunity to reflect. So definitely don't stop the talking about it in the conversation.
And Winnie, we have an ask here if we can follow up with the attendees, perhaps with an email with the e-resources that you mentioned.
Sure. So we've mentioned a number of those self-assessment tools, mental health in the workplace, and different kinds of resources that people could go to. I'd be happy to provide that.
Any other thoughts from our audience today you'd like to share? Well, we'll definitely touch base with you, Winnie, and get that and send it out to all of our attendees today. If there aren't any other questions, I definitely want to give you a huge thank you, Winnie, for your time today. And it was very valuable and very timely, as you said. So I know I took away quite a few things that, from basically to know my own value and how to move forward with certain things. So thank you so much for that. And again, I can't thank you enough. And with that, if there aren't any questions, I will let you go, Winnie. Thank you.
My pleasure to be here. And just remember, in any kind of conversation about value, no surprises. Know yourself, know your organization, and keep having those conversations.
Well, thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.